Good morning, everyone. Honorable Minister for Housing and Urban Affairs, Honorable Ministers from the states, respected Secretary Sir, fellow delegates and urbanites. It was a very auspicious start to this deliberation that we're going to have for the next 30 hours with the rendition of Vande Mataram. I wish all of us all the best for the next 30 hours. I'm here for the keynote address. I've got 15 minutes. Keynote addresses are essentially a warm-up, an appetizer for what will be a very sumptuous sort of intellectual conversation over the next 30 hours. In doing so, let me try and compress my insights on urbanization. It will be a dense session. Please bear with me. Please stay with me. I will talk about three things. One, the first principles on urbanization. Second, how Indian cities will not only shape India's destiny, but also global trends. And lastly, just to get the conversation started, I'll suggest my few humble recommendations of what we can think about over the next 30 hours. During COVID, I wrote a book. It's called India's Blind Spot, Understanding and Managing Our Cities. Putting understanding before the rest of the title was very, very important. Because essentially, our understanding of urbanization needs to be sort of rectified. It has been on a path of correction over the last decade or so, but I think more needs to be done. During COVID, everyone was writing obituary of cities pretty much every day, and India was no exception. But that's when I was researching about the book, and I saw, wait, we have seen worse natural disasters, worse pandemics, worse shocks, but the cities always sort of continued. So what is something that makes cities work? They don't cease. They probably will shift location from Harappa to Indo-Gangetic Plain. Maybe that happened 8,000 years ago. But what is something that is driving their onward march? Talking about first principle on urbanization is something that I would request delegates to keep in mind while they're discussing thoughts and ideas for the next 30 hours. One, cities are villages' last invention. 8,000 years ago, cities were started in the agrarian societies of Harappan civilization. Since then, everything that has increased the quality of life, prosperity, every invention has come from urban areas. Cities have been the last invention. In fact, I call in the book the humankind's longest running experiment. And I call it experiment because there is never a perfect city. There will never be a perfect city, but we improvise depending upon the times that we live in. Second, cities are the most important and critical tool for prosperity. By 1800, we had 1 billion people, 2% urban population. By 1900, we had 1.6 billion people and 14% urban population. By 2000, we had 6 billion people, out of which close to 50% were living in urban areas. The prosperity that we have seen in the last 250 years is no coincidence. It was driven by urban areas. In fact, we can say that cities are essentially the spatial manifestation of prosperity. Cities are nothing but labor markets. I think this is, if you have to take one takeaway from this whole exercise of my 15 minutes, it is this, that cities are nothing but labor markets. We're all from very different backgrounds are gathered in this room because someone from our forefathers' generation decided to move from rural areas to cities in looking for a better opportunity. This is why we are here. It is not a coincidence that industrialization, growth, prosperity, and urbanization are very closely linked. And lastly, what is cities but not a contest between agglomeration forces and the congestion forces? Agglomeration forces is when the firms, different sectors, same sectors, people, institutions, markets, and they come in close proximity. Congestion is anything that runs contrary to the agglomeration forces. And it is just not traffic. It could be pollution. It could be lack of access to water. It could be lack of access to affordable housing. It could be lack of access to transport. So we have to think about urbanization in that manner. And if you don't work on the congestion forces, if you do not work on amplifying the agglomeration forces, cities will become what I call in the book our greatest, our biggest, and perhaps a most fatal blind spot. We talk about DPI a lot. I think cities are the original DPI, the desired public infrastructure based on which prosperity is built. Now I'll move on the 7 trends that I think will shape India's destiny through urbanization and also global trends. First, Indian cities have placed India at the center of the global value chain. A churn started in 2008, financial crisis, 2012, EU crisis, then followed by COVID, then followed by the trade tariff wars, and so on and so forth, has placed India right in the middle of this whole global value chain. In every era, in every economy, that's how cities define the growth of any national economy. These are tools for power projection, essentially. I'll give you one example. Capitalism is primarily an urban movement. Communism is primarily a rural movement. We all know which movement won. There was the Washington consensus. There's now a Beijing consensus. But there's also a New Delhi consensus that we saw in the G20. It is through cities that you project power. International Solar Alliance, Raisina Dialogue, CDRI. These are some of the very early examples of how India is influencing the global trends. But we need to focus on how we sort of build the national and cluster level competitiveness, one, and second, how we absorb migrants into our cities. Because migrants are what make the cities important, they make the cities work, because they thicken the labor force. Second, cities are the theater for emancipation from caste and gender-based segregation. In cities, there's only and only one identity that matters, and that is what you do and how well you do. Dr. Ambedkar said, villages had no room for democracy. The Indian village is the very negation of the republic. One example is parliamentary democracy and constitutionalism, which are products of urbanization. The NFHS data tells a lot about how our sisters, our mothers, our wives have benefited from being in urban areas. We should not forget the importance of urban areas in improving the indicators. Third, placing India at the center of the global labor movement. The internal migrants in India is close to 100 million. If it were to be a country, it would have been the 14th largest country. We have a workforce of 125 million English-speaking workforce, out of which a large share holds a STEM degree. As the cities worldwide are shrinking, there would be a labor requirement that will come from India. The FTAs are being negotiated based on the migration. It is a very important tool. I mean, 200 years ago, a very aspiring Gujarati community moved to east of Africa, and the offspring of one of the migrants is now actually the mayor of New York. The migrants influence not only the destiny of the source location, but also of the destination location. And that is why migration is important. And they thicken the labor force. Remember, I told you about the labor force and how it is important. Fourth, it is about the global political order. And it's very important because that's where the exchange of political and economic ideas happen. If we don't work on our cities, we won't be able to get to that. The Delhi consensus is actually making a real mark there, and we should work towards that. And as I discussed about the capitalism and the communism, we should also discuss how different economies have had a different model of urbanization. There was a European model, there's an American model, there's an East Asian model, there's a Chinese model, and an Indian model of urbanization is also emerging. And it is changing things how. One, I will give you one very important example. When countries urbanize, the energy intensity of the GDP really goes up. India has defied that trend. India is the only G20 country where the energy intensity reduction targets are on the way. Fifth, SDGs success hinges on the success of our cities. Just think about SDGs, right? The ambitious global agenda, and how pretty much everything is actually linked to urbanization. If we get a game right on urbanization, we'll get the SDGs right. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to the world. If we fail on our cities, the world will fail on SDGs. That's where the prosperity, that's where the quality of life improvement, all of it is coming from that. Sixth, and I think this is the most important part of it, out of the 7 trends that I'll talk about. It is the prosperity, but with sustainability. I told you how there's an Indian model of urbanization. But now people will lament, oh, but in rural areas, there's less climate emission and so on and so forth. You do not compare urban areas to rural areas. You compare efficient urbanization to inefficient urbanization. And in that regard, I think India is really bucking the trend in terms of urbanizing, but very sustainability. Long way to go, yes, indeed, but we are working on it. Would there be an American version or a French version of it? There's a massive difference on how these two countries urbanize and how much investment is required to sort of efficiently urbanize and reduce the carbon emission. I'll give you one example. Swachh Bharat mission and how we eradicated landfill in most of the cities is one good example on how urbanization can be done very sustainability. The resource requirement per acre per capita in India is a fraction of what is required in the rest of the developed world. Literally a fraction. Per 1,000 people, The number of motorized vehicles is 22 in India. Probably it would have been around 25 now. In other countries, developed countries, it is close to 800, 900. We can't get to that point. We need to sort of build a game on the public transport. And I will talk about a few schemes that really caught my attention in terms of when we are urbanizing and how sustainably we are urbanizing. The Jal Jeevan Mission, the Perform Achieve Trade, the Ujjwala Yojana, the public transport focus on buses across states, the city gas distribution network, the ECBC's work on reducing emission from building, Swachh Bharat Mission, Amrit, smart cities, they're all working towards that. We have indeed figured out what is Indian model of urbanization. The Honorable Prime Minister mentioned about the Life Mission. This is reflecting the best in the urban areas. As more and more migrants move from rural areas to urban areas, we need to find a way to absorb them. We need to find a way to give them quality jobs, but we have to do it in a manner that doesn't increase the carbon emission. A task that has never been achieved before, but thanks to the progress of the urbanization of the last 250 years, we are able to provide those solutions. And lastly, in fact, the favorite of my friend is essentially the innovation part. Innovation is tricky, right? How do you define innovation? How do you get to innovation? You get to innovation by urbanizing. You get to innovation by spending in higher education. 7 decades ago, a very famous economist said that innovation seems like a mystery. How do you solve for it? Another economist remarked that the mystery of innovation is solved in the concentration of cities. Remember I told you about agglomeration. It is very important to sort of double click on what is agglomeration. Agglomeration comes from two forces that make agglomeration. One is localization, one is urbanization. Localization is when the firms and the institutions are in the same sector. The urbanization comes when they're in the different sector. Amazon decided whether to go to Seattle or Albuquerque. They ended up deciding going to Seattle. See what has happened to Seattle. What has happened to Bangalore? It has created a chain movement where innovation is the norm of the day. Anyhow, I think I've just got 2.5 minutes left, and now I want to sort of give a tease of some ideas that caught my attention when I was thinking about this conference. This is a very timely conference. I have not seen such a well-curated urban conference in India for a really, really long time, and I thank everyone. I thank Secretary Sir for sort of incubating it, and I think it is a fertile ground to exchange a few ideas. Could we think of mainstreaming affordable rental housing for all? And the focus is on rental housing, because when the migrants come, they can't really afford a house here. So rental housing is the way to do it. And we should prefer that within 10 to 15 years, they're able to move from rental housing to their own housing. The focus is on accessibility, not ownership. Could we have an aspirational migrants program? Because of the one nation, one ration card, we know about the migration patterns, the migration corridors. We know everything about when they move, how they move, what they need. And if we do that, can we saturate the needs of the migrants through the government schemes? Aspirational districts program has been a success, and we can use an aspirational migrants program. On urban transport, could we have a single authority for all city transport? Could we have a mission called One City, One Day, One Road? Essentially, on one day of the week, in one city, you close one road for, say, 6 hours or a whole day for motorized transport. Let the people claim back the city. Let the trust and the vitality of the city increase. It happens in all big cities. Why can't India do it? Smart Cities Mission can take this up. Could we think about a mission focusing on recharging, rejuvenating, and reclaiming urban lakes? This is a first bulwark against flooding, climate change, urban heat island effect, biodiversity, increasing quality of life. Could we learn from the Chinese example of monetizing land, of recycling land, and even releasing a massive amount of land lying with the public sector enterprises? Maybe we could lease the land from them. How can we have a harmony between built and natural environment? And most importantly, between the aesthetics, local culture, and tourism. Let us not all forget that tourism is the biggest and the easiest employment generator, something that the migrants from villages can very, very easily adapt to. Could we mainstream safe and child-friendly cities by filling the police vacancies, flipping the role of street vendors, enabling the night economy, and promoting mixed-use neighborhoods? And can we finally define how urban we are? The census definition, the statutory towns, there's a 5% gap, 26% and 31%. That is as of 2011. That 5% gap is essentially 12 Singapores. 15 years later, we're probably looking at a larger gap. If we go by some liberal definitions of what is urban, we are probably 60, 70% urban. Let's get to that point. Or at least the states may have their own definition, but at least there should be one singular definition from the union. Could we think of Bureau of Water Efficiency like the Bureau of Energy Efficiency? There are energy-saving companies that have done a phenomenal job in India. Could we think of water-saving companies? Could we work on the Easement Act of 1882 to reduce the depletion of groundwater resources? The thoughts are many, like most of you, but here I stop. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I just want to conclude that Gandhiji actually said that, the heart of India lives in its cities. At that point of time, and he said it, which is actually much before the independence, but at the independence, the population was close to 300 million. We had a 30 billion GDP, and around 10% of the population was urbanized. Now we are a 4 trillion economy of 1.4 billion people, out of which close to 50-60% of the population is urbanized. Sure, the heart lives in the villages, but the mind, soul, and certainly our wallets live in the cities. So thank you for the opportunity, everyone. Jai Hind and Vande Mataram. Thank you for the time.